This is Johan Lehman. He is a master's graduate under Pat's program at McMaster University. And I got to know him and I hosted both him and some other McMaster researchers at my college. So, Johan, take it away.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. It's great to see you all. I'm Jonah. I was one of Pat's master's students. I just successfully defended about 3 weeks ago. And my project was on land-based turtles in Eastern Georgian Bay. And so my title is Bridging Knowledge Gaps for Protection and Recovery, Habitat Loss and Threats in the land-based turtle in Eastern Georgian Bay. So to start off, I've got these 8 different species of freshwater turtle that can be found in Ontario on the screen here. And that's because they all have something in common. And unfortunately, it's the fact that they are all considered species at risk of extinction. And this is at the federal level, so in Canada. So we're seeing large-scale population decline for many freshwater turtle species. And what we're really interested in particular is the Blanding's turtle. It's easily distinguishable by its bright yellow chin, but unfortunately it is considered federally endangered in Canada, and this is primarily attributed to road mortality, habitat loss, and habitat fragmentation. Now, the Blanding's turtle to us is really important to study because it's considered an umbrella species. And the umbrella species concept is a really important one to think about because it's this idea that there are animals out there that have very large home ranges, use a lot of different habitats, such as the Blanding's turtle, and this overlaps with the habitat use of many other species and species at risk, including other freshwater turtle species. And so by studying the Blanding's turtle, we can not only protect and mitigate their habitat, but also the habitats of other species as well. Now, there's a need for accurate policies that can really protect and mitigate these habitats. And the federal government, they protect what is called critical habitat. And that is the habitat that is required by a species in order to carry out critical life processes. The federal government considers it nesting and overwintering sites for the Blanding's turtle. So these are sites that they use to lay eggs, as well as sites that they use to spend about half their lifetime, 6 months of the year, overwintering. And so it's really important that we investigate critical habitat because while nesting and overwintering sites are really important, there might be other habitats that are important too. And furthermore, Eastern Georgian Bay is an area with a relatively abundant population of Blanding's turtles. However, it's relatively understudied. And so with it having a lot of high quality habitat, there's a need for us to identify what that critical habitat is for Blanding's turtles to protect and mitigate. And furthermore, a lot of studies that occur for the Blanding's turtle occur in southern Ontario. This is an area that is a lot less, it's a lot more degraded in comparison to Eastern Georgian Bay. And if we base all of our protections and regulations on these degraded areas, it's really hard to apply them to Georgian Bay because there's a very large difference. Georgian Bay has a lot of pristine habitats. And so that's where our study site is. Eastern Georgian Bay, it's an area with an abundance of high-quality habitat that is under low disturbance conditions. Our study site is located on First Nations land as well as their traditional lands, which are adjacent. And so there are some areas with moderate levels of human development. This includes roads, cottages, docks, marinas, things like that. But we also have a good amount of that high-quality habitat. And so this is what our study site looks like here. And we've got a whole bunch of different habitats that we classified. And what you really want to know is for the Blanding's turtle, how they use this area and what threats they're facing, right? And so we classified these different habitats you can see built up as, marinas, cottages, roads, anything human development. We've got forests, thicket swamps, rock barrens, characteristic of the Canadian Shield. You've got your marshes, your peatlands, something that I call shallow water, which is really kind of beaver and palingens as well as Georgian Bay coastlines. And you also have lakes as well. And so what we're really trying to answer is kind of 2 things. The first is we're investigating patterns and habitat use. And we're looking at preferences in males and females during the active and nesting season. And that's to try and understand what regulations need to be put in place, as well as what threats they face. And then the other is what critical habitats, nesting and overwintering, do they use in this area, and how do they compare across their geographic range? So the way that we did this is through fieldwork. We studied 11 females and 11 males total, and our study was across the years of 2019, 2021, and 2022. Then we used radio telemetry and GPS loggers. So radio telemetry is where you attach a radio transmitter to a turtle shell. You can find their location using an antenna. Whenever you find their location, you take a GPS point, and the habitat that they're in is the habitat that they're using. We also use GPS loggers because they kind of take a point whenever we're not around, right? So every 4 hours or so. And we tracked 1 to 4 times per week during the active season, which was kind of spring to the end of summer. 2 to 4 times per week during the nesting season, when females are on those long distance movements to try and figure out that, or to use that nesting habitat. And then once in the overwintering season at 3 different years. And then finally, to actually figure out exactly where nest sites are, we used a mix of community site data from our First Nations partners, as well as using GPS loggers. So I'll go over kind of some results that we've had from our study. In terms of general habitat use, we found that male and female Blanding's turtles used a variety of different wetland habitats across the active seasons. They used both kind of inland palustrine wetlands is the technical term, as well as coastal lacustrine wetlands. And while a lot of studies will say that Blanding's turtles use these inland wetlands, there's not a lot of information that shows the extent that Blanding's turtles use coastal wetlands. And that's something that we really highlight in our study. They heavily use them. And they also use them for travel. And so travel corridors are something that we suggest being considered a critical habitat. For Blanding's turtles in our area, we found beaver and cowgans were really important for travel, but the Georgian Bay coastline was as well. Any kind of shallow water along the coast of Georgian Bay that's less than 2 meters deep, we found Blanding's turtles to heavily use. Now, we also found thicket swamps were important for travel. This was kind of between inland and wet and coastal wetlands. They're a very thick kind of swamp that's very protective. And something that was really novel in our study as well is the use of lake. And you kind of think a turtle would use a teacup for the water for travel, but the Blanding's turtle is not known for that. In this study, we found that 4 different individuals made long distance movements. I believe the farthest was over 2.5 kilometers. This is over deep open water just to access a different land mass. Now, we wanted to, based off this information, look at habitat preferences. And so I'm going to show a little bit of results from my thesis. We looked at something called habitat selection, which is really just this idea of understanding, is there a pattern in these turtles' habitat use? And if there is, that means that there's conservation implications. And so we found that there was a significant evidence of habitat selection for both sexes across the active seasons. And these results here kind of indicate habitat preferences during the active season. And so we got males on the right and females on the left. I'm not going to go through the whole figure exactly, but any black bars mean that there's a significant preference, and the direction of the black bar shows you where the preference is. And so what we can see here is that there's a relative preference for using shallow water, that's beaver and cowgans as well as Georgian Bay coastlines, over most other habitat types. And so that's driven by the beaver and cowgans as well as Georgian Bay coastlines. There's a picture of a female that was kind of stuttering around the bottom of a Georgian Bay coastline. And we also found that there was evidence of this during the nesting season as well, meaning that they used Georgian Bay coastlines for travel to kind of find their nesting sites. Now, we also looked at nesting season preferences for something else. And this is something that's really important and relates to government policies. So Blanding's turtles under natural conditions in Georgian Bay are known to use lichen-filled rock outcrops for nesting. And that's a very difficult substrate. We can kind of imagine a turtle trying to figure out where to nest, right? And so we actually found a Blanding's turtle do that in a low disturbance part of our study site. But we also found in kind of the moderately degraded area of our study site that Blanding's turtles use roadside nests. And what we wanted to know is there a preference of one or the other? And what we actually found is that there is. So first of all, 7 of 11 females made use of what we call built-up habitats during the nesting season of 2022. And this includes a heavy use of roadsides, docks, and marinas. You can see this picture here. It is actually a turtle that we found inside a marina at a dock, right by Mary's boat. And it's a gravid female that was on nesting travels, looking for kind of nesting habitats and moving around. And so what we did is we tested for preferences for selection for 6 of these females, and we actually found that there's a significant preference for using these built-up habitats, right? So roadsides, docks, marinas, in comparison to those lichen-filled rock outcrops. And so this tells us is that when available, females have a preference for using these built-up habitats over their natural rock bear habitats during the nesting season. And this poses a really big risk to the subpopulation in the area, because that means they're seeking out human-developed areas instead of the natural habitats, which can act as an ecological sink, right? You've probably often seen a lot of turtles nesting alongside roads, right? This can, these roads, with people driving by, they can often drive, kill the turtle, or they can go over the nest, killing the nest. You can also have higher predation rates from foxes, skunks, things like that alongside roads. So it's really important to highlight that regulations need to happen when it comes to roads in this area. Now, overwintering habitat was something else we looked at in our study. And we found that land-based turtles use marshes, peatlands, shallow water wetlands, and swamps for overwintering. And we wanted to compare this across their range. And comparing across the range, we found the one habitat type that they didn't use in our study site was streams and creeks. And when we can compare this to other studies, we actually find a few things. So the first that I want to point out is that if you look at our study here at the top, in red here, we can see that we have the largest variation in our study site in Eastern Georgian Bay for overwintering habitat for land-based turtles. And this is in comparison to across the range. What this really speaks to is the high quality habitat that Eastern Georgian Bay has for overwintering for land-based turtles. There's over 140 wetlands in this area, and land-based turtles could make use of all of them, right? And in comparison to somewhere like Southern Ontario, there might only be a few wetlands that some turtles could use, right? So there's another thing that I want to point out, because you can kind of see that there's X's all across for the different habitats that they're using. But while there might be some similarities, across the range, every study site is really different. And what this really means is that in order to identify critical habitat, site-specific protections and regulations need to happen from site-specific studies. So overall, what we wanted to do in our study site is we wanted to outline what needs to be protected and what needs to be mitigated in Eastern Georgian Bay. And we identified, to start, for the active season, inland wetlands as well as coastal wetlands need protections. Now, in terms of travel, because this is really important to land-based turtles, they're known to travel very much, 2 kilometers on average. Thicket swamps, beaver impoundments, and the littoral zone need protections. And then in terms of nesting season, it's rock bearings and active roadsides. As in terms of threat mitigation, we did a little bit of a calculation using geographic information systems, and we found that our study site is made up of 1.3% human development, but it has a disproportionate impact on land-based turtles in this area, right? And so this means that more research needs to be investigating into roadsides, docks, and marinas in order to understand how we can effectively mitigate them. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all for watching. I want to thank, there's so many people to thank. It's a very collaborative project, but thank you to Mary Muter first and foremost, and the Jordan Bay Great Lakes Foundation for hosting this. Thank you to Pat Chow Fraser, Colette Isaac, Tristan Sin, Elia Fredericks from Moose Deer Point First Nation. Thank you to the Tadnack Club, the Tadnack Conservation Foundation, as well as the New Frontiers and Research Fund. And thank you so much for watching.
Yes.